It's been a little over a month since I upgraded my 12.9-inch M1 iPad Pro to the 13-inch M4 iPad Pro. Now for me, the larger iPad Pro is my primary personal mobile device, meaning that while I'm not allowed to use it for work, I do use it for basically all of my personal business and my side hustle. Like, the videos for this channel are completely edited on my iPad. I manage the channel from my iPad. I manage my blog from my iPad. Basically, anything that's not writing code gets done from my iPad. And it's not really much of a spoiler to say that not only is this the best iPad that Apple's ever made, it's actually one of the best portable devices Apple's ever made. And I say that about just the iPad. That's before I get to the Magic Keyboard, and that's before I get to the Apple Pencil Pro, which only elevate the experience. However, when I look on YouTube at kind of the 1 month later iPad Pro reviews, and even some of the reviews from around release time, there's this narrative of, is the M4 iPad Pro going to save the iPad? And I find that to be weird, but ultimately not surprising. The narrative that the iPad is dead or dying has existed for a while, especially since iPad chips moved to the Mac. For the purposes of this review/discussion, what I want to talk about is a month and a half later, how is this iPad holding up? How am I finding the core upgrades in my day-to-day work and day-to-day use? Are they as important and impactful as they were when I got the iPad? And of course, I want to address this idea of whether or not the M4 iPad Pro saves the iPad. Let's talk about the hardware improvements first. An iPad is a computer that's designed to be used with your hands, and you're designed to be working with it with your hands. So the screen ideally should always be the best thing that's available. And as you would expect, the tandem OLED display on the M4 iPad Pro is absolutely the best display Apple has ever shipped. That's not surprising. I don't watch a ton of content on my iPads, so while there are those benefits of the deep blacks and the better contrast ratio, for me, the biggest benefit the screen has presented has been the brightness. And now I know on paper, the SDR brightness for this iPad is the same as it was for the M1 Mini LED iPad Pro at 1000 nits. As someone who relies heavily on auto brightness, I find that the M4 iPad Pro is generally brighter in the same conditions than my M1. And that makes it more usable in different lighting conditions. Although if you're going to be using your iPad outside, you'd want to look into the nano texture option, which is, of course, incredibly expensive, but anecdotally, from the reviews I've read and seen, seems like really helps with reflections when you're outside. And since iPad is such a portable device, that might make sense for some use cases. The next part of the hardware I want to talk about is the general form factor. And by form factor, I mean, yes, this thing got thinner and lighter, especially for the 12.9-inch model, which when we went to Mini LED got thicker and heavier. Something as portable as an iPad should always be as light as possible. Thin is debatable, but weight for sure is very important. Again, this product is designed to be held in your hands. The Magic Keyboard, using it as a laptop, using it at your desk, those are all secondary use cases. It's designed to be held and used this way. And so you want to minimize fatigue holding it over time. And that's why it's important this thing continues to get lighter. The thinness for me, well, I just think it's impressive to make something thinner, lighter, and faster. As far as battery life, I find the battery life to be roughly the same as my M1 model. So of heavy use, you're probably looking at, let's say, 5 to 6 hours, which is not as much as you can get from some laptops these days. We're probably beyond the point where an iPad will have better battery life than a laptop. The chips are getting more efficient in laptops now, and of course, laptops are almost always going to be thicker and have bigger batteries. So if battery life is your main concern, then the M4 iPad Pro doesn't really help in that situation. So the weight difference, the reduction in weight overall makes the M4 iPad Pro just a much better tablet. I have no problem, reading in bed on this thing, editing in bed, touching up a blog post in bed, just basically whatever. I don't have any qualms about doing that when I'm laying down. I've started doing this weird thing now when I'm editing my videos where I'll start pacing while I'm editing. I don't have any issue doing that. It's just more usable in more scenarios because of that weight reduction. It wasn't surprising to me to see a lot of people confused about why the iPad Pro has the M4. I guess it's natural to look at a new chip and say, well, there must be a reason they needed such a fast processor in this iPad. Something's going to be taking advantage of all this performance. I guess if you're a techie, that's a natural tendency to think that the reason you need the newest thing is that it's the fastest. Well, it turns out it's not really a mystery at all. They actually told us during the keynote for this product.
That's right. The new Pro jumps from M2 all the way to M4 to enable its amazingly thin design and game-changing display while delivering a huge leap in performance.
Keep in mind, the M4 itself is not a processor. It is a system on chip, or SoC, which means that chip is comprised of multiple pieces, including the processor, including the GPU, including the RAM, including the modem if you have a cellular model, or the Wi-Fi radio. All those things are contained on that one chip. That means there are more reasons to potentially use a chip than just processor performance. There are two reasons this has the M4. One is the display controller to drive the tandem OLED display. The product could not exist without it. And the second reason is the additional efficiency of the M4 makes it so this product could be driven in its super thin form factor without overheating. In my mind, it's really those two things. That's it. It's not about performance, and that's okay. Performance has almost never been a problem for an iPad except for, I think it was the iPad 3, that first Retina iPad. That thing struggled. One of the worst iPads I've owned. So with that out of the way, performance is, as you might imagine, completely fine. For the things you would do with an iPad, managing email, browsing the web, editing video, making music, all of this stuff just flies. The iPad's not going to break a sweat. I think that's actually a good thing. People will tell you, whoa, the M4 is overpowered for an iPad. Well, you know what we used to call being overpowered back in the day? Headroom, meaning that this iPad will last you 5, 6, 7, 8 years and still be performant. I don't understand this obsession with finding something that makes the iPad grind to a halt as proof that you're taking advantage of the M4. That makes no sense to me. Like, isn't the fact that you can do all these things without the iPad hiccuping, isn't that taking advantage of the M4? So now that we've seen what's coming in iPad OS 18, there's some disappointment that don't seem to be any M4 specific software features coming in the new update. And that's an understandable disappointment. I'll be honest, I was hoping for a little bit more, but you can't ignore that we're still getting all of the Apple Intelligence features. We're still getting all the customization features that are coming to iOS as well. There are some small improvements in iPadOS 18 they haven't talked about. There's the compact display mode in the Files app. There's the ability to format external storage. There are features for sure, but if you're looking for some big software feature to justify the M4, that really doesn't exist to this point and probably won't. The M4 has what is currently the fastest neural engine of all of Apple's chips, which to me means that I would expect some of the Apple Intelligence features, specifically I would think around the image playground, image generation stuff, to perform maybe a little bit faster on the iPad Pro than on older devices. I don't think that'll be by a huge margin, but that specifically seems like a feature that I would expect to perform best on this machine. Otherwise, iPadOS is iPadOS. Now, don't get me wrong, iPadOS has issues. There are things that need to be improved, but I don't think it's fundamentally broken. I think it's fundamentally a good operating system. Apple needs to keep iterating on it. All that to say, the software experience is as it was. If you love or hate iPadOS, the M4 iPad Pro is not going to change your opinion one way or the other. As far as Apple's first-party accessories, I don't have a lot to say there that I didn't already say in my first look, which I'll link to in the description or here-ish. The Magic Keyboard is a very nice improvement over the previous model. The aluminum feels really premium. It's a really good typing experience, but I'm not a keyboard snob, so take that for what it's worth. In your lap, it leans back a little bit more than the previous model, which is kind of unfortunate, but not at all a deal breaker. On the Apple Pencil Pro side, there's not a ton to say there. I mean, I've worked through my issues with squeezing the pencil just when I'm holding it, which I apparently had been doing this whole time, so I'm not triggering the squeeze gesture every 5 seconds like I was when I first got this thing. I'm still confused as to why we have double tap and squeeze. I really just think we need one, which is probably squeeze. I do want to slot in my standard reminder, because this comes up in every iPad review. Reviewers seem to assume that if you're buying an iPad, then you're going all in on Apple's accessories. Remember, there are third-party alternatives you can use And you can use things beyond keyboard cases. My setup here, which I've shown on the channel, right? Maybe 75% of the time I use my 13-inch iPad, it is on a stand plugged into my Thunderbolt dock using a Bluetooth keyboard and a mouse or a trackpad. It's not the magic keyboard case. You don't have to jump right to turn this thing into a laptop. It is way more versatile than that. So don't be afraid to think out of the box and don't just assume you have to get Apple's accessories. There are great keyboard and stylus alternatives made by other companies that may suit you just fine, some of which I've talked about on this channel and will continue to talk about in the future. So obviously I'm pretty iPad and iPadOS positive, so what are the negatives about the M4 iPad Pro? Well, I'm going to go back to software first. Not a rant about iPadOS in general, but more just a statement on Apple's software quality over the past few years. And it's been no secret. Other people have commented on this. In general, it seems like a lot of what they're putting out is buggier than it used to be. And that's definitely present in this iPad Pro and in iPadOS in general. There are bugs, there are what feel like cut corners. There's the stupid wallpaper rotation bug that's been in iPadOS 17 the entire time. It feels like, again, because there's so many platforms Apple is supporting, that even though they are one of the richest slash most valuable companies in the world, that they're stretching themselves too thin on software. They're supporting too many platforms and updating them every year when they probably don't have to anymore. And yes, everything shares common core components, but endless money doesn't give you endless resources. So they're still resource constrained on implementing features. I think one of the reasons that iPadOS 18 doesn't have iPad specific features is because they were resource constrained trying to get Apple Intelligence out the door. The other negative would, of course, be the pricing. The M4 iPad Pros went up in price, I believe, about $200 over the previous model, which is a lot of money for a product that was already expensive. My biggest qualm in the pricing range, I think, is really more around value. So with the base M series chips on the Mac now, starting with the M3, I believe, they go up to a max of 24 gigabytes of RAM. iPad, those same chips only support up to 16 gigabytes of RAM. And before you say anything, yes, since iPadOS 16, iPads can absolutely make use of that RAM. That is a thing. So it's frustrating to me that the highest end iPads top out at 16 gigabytes, whereas they top out at 24 gigabytes on the Mac. So I think it'd be a better value if that same top end gave us 24 gigabytes of RAM and that 16 came down to one of the lower price points. I think having more iPads out there with a bigger allotment of RAM is going to encourage more pro app developers to make bigger and better software for iPad OS. So to close, I want to address whether or not the M4 iPad Pro saves the iPad. And the short answer is no, the iPad doesn't need saving. I think the idea that it needs saving is that there's still this notion, there's still this narrative, this thought that, well, this is supposed to replace a laptop, right? And for some of us, it has. Keep in mind, a lot of the value in iPad is the fact that it is a tablet and you don't need the keyboard, you don't need the pointing device. It's simpler to use. Apple pitched the iPad as a third category of device between a smartphone and a laptop. And that's the idea that I bought into when I bought that first iPad. And to me, that still applies today. The idea that the iPad will replace a laptop, for me, that's never been something I've been looking for. Now, that just kind of happened over time where I found that as Apple kept adding features to iPadOS, like I was using my personal Mac less and less to the point whereas now I need it for just doing taxes, I think, because the mobile version of TurboTax looks like it would be terrible. I don't think the primary goal of the iPad is or should be to replace a laptop. The iPad Pro fits into a variety of different use cases. Like for some people, it is just a content consumption device. For some people, maybe it is just a note taking device. But for some of us, it's a video editing device. It's our mobile computer. It does all the things that would have required a laptop before, and that's okay. The iPad's not a failure if it doesn't replace a laptop. Similarly, the iPad's not a failure if you don't have a use for it. I think we're beyond the point where everyone needs to have every device. Like if you look at the iPad or the iPad Pro, and can't figure out what you're going to use it for, then it's not for you. And that's okay. That doesn't make the product a failure. It just means it's not for you. So I don't see the iPad as needing to be saved. It's still fulfilling that original mandate, that original goal of being a third category of device that does some things better than a laptop and a smartphone. It's still doing that really well. And across the iPad line, it's doing that in different ways. The M4 iPad Pro is the best iPad Apple has ever made, but it's still just an iPad, and that's okay. That's not a derogatory thing. There's a lot of value in an iPad. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you made it to the end of this probably long video, thank you for sticking with me. If you could like the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out, that would help me and the channel out a ton. Thank you for your time. I will catch you in the next one.